Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. Today, I'm joined by my friend Pete here, and we are going to have a really interesting discussion on how to amplify your freedom, which is just a fancy way of saying that we're going to be talking about wireless strategies for guitar players and bassists. But before we get into that, I'm going to launch a little poll here while I go through my housekeeping, because we want to get an idea of you that are attending, where you come from, and what your experience level is with wireless for guitar and bass. So I'm going to launch this poll right here. All right. So feel free to get your answer selected here. We want to know, have you used wireless systems for your guitar or bass? We want to know, are you comfortable with it? Have you tried it, but it didn't really work for you, so you're kind of trying to look for more information? Or this is brand new, you've never tried it before, so you were looking for information. So select your answer on that. And while you're voting, I am going to give you a little bit of housekeeping about today's webinar. First of all, this webinar is being recorded and will be available for on-demand viewing. Usually takes us about a week or so to get it edited, but once it is edited, it will be available at shure.com/webinars. Once again, that website is shure.com/webinars, and that is the place to go for all things Shure webinars. We have a lot of great archive sessions across a lot of audio topics, so feel free to go there and see all of those. And we also have any information about any upcoming sessions we have, so that's shure.com/webinars. Additionally, when it comes to the recording, we will send an email out to all of the registrants with that direct link to the recorded webinar once it's available. So you can either keep an eye on it, shure.com/webinars, or you can wait for an email. Second of all, as we go through the session today, if you have any questions, please feel free to type those in the questions section. But be patient, because we will be holding on questions until the end of the session. All right, so I've gotten through my housekeeping, and it looks like we've pretty much got all of our respondings here for the poll, so I'm going to close it, and I'm going to share the results. So it looks like we've got a lot of people that are pretty comfortable with wireless, so this might be sort of a refresher for you, but hopefully you might learn a few new things. And then we've got a handful of people that have never tried wireless before, so you are all definitely in the right place. All right, let's hide these results, and let's get back to our presentation here. All right, so as I said, I am joined today by my colleague and friend, Mr. Pete Carparelli. Pete works in applications engineering, and Pete and I have some good history together because we started in customer service together about over a decade ago. So we know each other well. And then I'm going to introduce myself. I usually don't say much about myself, but since this is more of a conversation, figured you might want to know who I am. I'm Cheryl Jennison DeProza, and I work at corporate communications here at Shure and have been doing these webinars for over a decade as well. And you'll see from this slide here, both Pete and I are performers in our own right. Pete is an amazing guitar player, singer. He's also a drummer. He's in a fantastic band called Bloodletter. And then I'm kind of the opposite end of the spectrum. I'm a singer, yes, and I perform in an ABBA tribute band called Dancing Queen and ABBA Salute. So you kind of have two opposite ends of the spectrum here. However, we can be friends. Pete and I are good buddies. We talk a lot about music and gigging, and we do have one thing in common. And what is that, Mr. Carparelli?
We both use wireless all the time.
And we also believe that anything worth doing is worth overdoing.
That's right.
All right. So enough about us. Let's get into what we're going to be discussing today. So here's today's agenda. We're going to start by sort of just discussing, an introduction to wireless. We'll talk about some common wireless setups. We'll talk about pedal boards. Oh, those are the great mystery to me, so I'm very intrigued into learning more about that. And then we'll get into the Q&A. So let's dive in. So, Pete, wireless for guitars and bass. Why? I mean, I think that's a good place to start. Why would you even want to go wireless?
Well, I mean, it's all about the showmanship, right? It's all about being able to engage the audience. It's all about having the freedom to move about on stage. And, a lot of people don't think about it, but the safety of using wireless, the safety bonuses, I should say, of using wireless, you don't have to trip over a cable anymore. Is it a convenience at the end of the day? Don't know why I got muted. Yes, but after all, wireless does do a lot for your show, and it's just, it's the way the technology is moving forward. It's the way the shows are moving forward. People want their performances to be more active, and the audience loves it. So why not take advantage of this new technology that also sounds really good?
It's also good because then you can get close to the other guitar player on the other side of the stage when you're rocking that great guitar harmony.
Exactly.
Fantastic. All right. So what do we need to know about wireless? Where do we start here, Pete?
The basics of wireless are, it's fairly simple. We'll have another slide where it kind of points out different components, but, in most cases, or in today's case, you have an instrument or a voice or what have you, and that acoustic event gets captured as electrical energy, and then it gets coded to either, usually it's digital nowadays, but analog or digital, RF encoding, and then that travels through the air to a receiver, a stationary unit where your signal gets unpacked or modulated and down and out through your signal chain. So you need an instrument or a voice, you need a transmitter, and you need a receiver. You have those three things, you have a wireless system. Some come in different flavors. We have little tabletop receivers. We have larger rack mount units that you see at a lot of shows or broadcast type use, and for musicians as well. And we've got, as you can see in the slide here, we have pedal receivers now, which, can just live on a little pedal board. So depending on your rig, depending on your needs, your show, a wireless system can fit into a whole lot of different, facets, functions, what have you.
All right. Awesome. So let's talk about those wireless components a little bit more.
Yeah. So, as I alluded to just a minute ago, we've got, transmitters and receivers. Those are kind of the big ones. Most commonly when people think wireless, they think of a vocal system. They think of, the SM58 right here on the screen. I think you're still a KSM9 fan.
Actually, I've been on the 11 for about a year now, which is fantastic.
Fantastic, yeah. So a wireless microphone, you got to sing, you got to talk. You don't want the cable. There's your transmitter right there. Some simpler than others. Here we have a BLX system and a GLXD Plus transmitter, but most commonly when people think wireless, they still think vocal systems. Instrument systems are getting obviously more and more popular. They have been around a long time. I mean, even back in the days when AC/DC was, I think, on their Highway to Hell tour and all that stuff, that's when guitar wireless was kind of made into a thing, thanks to Angus Young running around like a maniac. But the technology's obviously come a long way. They were putting transmitters in the back of his guitar, and then like taping them into the housing of the guitar or near the pickup cavity or something like that. And, somehow they still worked well enough. Now, thanks to, decades of research and development, we have smaller transmitters that can go on a strap. So you don't have to worry about carving a hole in your custom shop Les Paul. And you get better transmission, better reception to a receiver. And if it's, in a rack off stage or if it's on a pedal board, now things have gotten more efficient. They sound better. They keep the true tone of your system. Microphones have come a long way. You have just better retention of your dulcet tones or your loud passages singing in Dancing Queen. But the point is transmitter, receiver. Those are the main things, and an instrument or a voice.
Awesome. Oh, hey, look at that. Microphone or input. There's the transmitter. Right. I fell a little behind on my clicking there. All right, so let's talk a little bit about antennas, because that's a very important part of all of this.
Yeah, so a lot of folks ask us, in day-to-day calls and work that I'm doing in our department or at trainings or, even at trade shows, how does this work? Or, what do I need to know about the antenna? And the root of this all is that, that antenna is going to, transmit whatever you're playing, whatever you're singing through the air, and that's going to get unpacked at a receiver. Now, a lot of folks wonder, oh, well, can I put a different antenna on a transmitter? Or, what happens if I move the antenna and it starts to, I hear like a crackling or things short out? Well, yeah, there's a lot of sophisticated stuff going on in that transmitter to make it work. But most of the time, especially in the case of, GLXD shown here, it's fixed. It's not removable, but you don't have to worry about it because it's, solidly built. So that little antenna, that teeny little nub on the top of the body pack, yes, that is actually the antenna. And compared to the original GLXD line, that's actually built into the assembly now, which is really neat. So it's very solid. You could drop it on the antenna. I probably have a handful of times. And it's very sturdy, so you don't have to worry about it breaking. And that takes your guitar signal, your instrument, your whatever, through the air to the receiver, unpacked. And as shown here on the tabletop receiver, yeah, those aren't removable. but those are half-wave antennas there. And then the pedal receiver, actually, they're built inside. So you don't even have to worry about stepping on anything, on your pedal board, which obviously, if you play shows kind of like mine, somebody might get on the stage and just accidentally trample your gear. So one less variable to worry about always helps. But yeah, the animation's kind of just showing you exactly what's happening. It's transmitting through on multiple planes. It's getting unpacked to the receiver, and it carries your signal off with minimal latency, if any, that the human ear can discern.
Awesome. So we talked a little bit about how, there's vocals and then there's, wireless for instruments. What's the difference? Why is it different? How is it different?
Oh, I mean, the human voice is getting captured by a microphone. The microphone itself can be one of many different types that will either, color the sound of your voice, that maybe might roll off some higher end frequencies or shave off a little low end. There's a lot more room for tonal interpretation based on your voice. It's different from anyone else's. They're never the same. And the microphone. No two microphones work exactly the same, but different types, dynamic versus condenser, cardioid versus supercardioid. There's a lot of elements that can change the sound, but with guitars and basses specifically, it's a little more predictable. I mean, obviously everyone's hands playing the instrument makes a difference, but the value of the pot that the pickup is wired into, the type of pickup being used in the guitar, the tone wood, all that stuff kind of makes up, a composite of your tone. But then the wireless system, in this case, I use GLXD as an example all the time. What is it doing to your signal? Is it changing it? Is it boosting it? Is it, are you patting the transmitter or, the receiver down? For an instrument system, it's so much different from the voice because it's just a little more consistent. It's a little more predictable. You can kind of assume, okay, cable into transmitter. I don't have to worry about this being affected acoustically around me. It's the guitar doing the work, your hands playing the instrument, and you don't have to worry about any other acoustic challenges. So yeah, you don't really notice as much high-end roll-off. You might not notice a warmth from your guitar being exacerbated by a different type of wireless system, because GLXD now in modern digital systems are getting so good at keeping the tonality of your instrument unchanged. So the better the bit depth, better the sample rate of the digital system, the more sophisticated the processing, you would assume cleaner tone, cleaner sound, more natural sound. So people have noticed as time has gone on, you don't have to worry about the acoustic challenges of putting a microphone on an amp, and talking into a specific microphone, all these other things. You can take a digital wireless system, run it into probably a modeler these days, and go direct to a PA, and it keeps things as consistent as possible.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest difference as far as I've noticed.
Most of the guitar players I've worked with are so into their tone and work so hard on their tone. And, the last thing you want is to put all that hard work into your tone and then, have your wireless system, get in the way. And it needs to be transparent. It needs to just deliver that sound. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Well, one of my favorite analogies that I've heard ever in my career was actually from you at the very beginning of my time in customer service, but then moving into applications engineering. I remember you telling me about a customer who spent, I think, some thousands of dollars on a ULXD system and then bought a $30 head-worn microphone. And you said, they bought a Prada suit and Walmart shoes or something like that. If you're going to invest the time into your rig and you're going to spend all of this money on a guitar or a hand-built bespoke bass, and you're going to use all these nice pedals, you should probably use a wireless system to deliver all of that cool tonal variation that you've just spent all this money on and worked so hard to get. Use the right wireless system, use the right tool. Unfortunately, GLXD doesn't cost an arm and a leg, and it sounds great. So keep that going,
It's like the Nordstrom Rack pair of shoes.
There it is. Thank you. The Nordstrom Rack pair of shoes, yes. So, yeah, if you're going to spend all that money on a really nice guitar, you might as well get a decent enough wireless system to keep things clean, keep it sounding nice. Don't invest in a bad power supply. Don't use bad cabling. If you're making them yourself, follow the instructions. Take your time. you know?
Awesome. All right. Shall we move on to the next one?
Yeah, sure.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about some common wireless setups and what we need to know.
So one of my favorite things I've ever seen, the left-hand picture there, that's Alex Lifeson's rig from Rush. And if you're a fan of Rush, you know that that man had a wide array of sounds, was moving all over stage, using tons of cool effects and multiple amps to get the sounds that he needed. That's great. A rig like that, where you effectively need a moving truck just to get it from gig to gig, you're probably not using a GLX-D6 on a pedal board. So if you look on the right-hand side of that picture, the dual displays, brightly lit, those, I believe, were Axient digital receivers, or even ULXD and UHFR prior to that. And those receivers lived in the rack. So his entire rig was side stage with directional antennas aimed towards the stage. He didn't even touch it. That's all a guitar tech's job. Now, for the rest of us who don't have Rush's fan base, budget, their typical touring
Their
venues,
techs.
their techs, their roadies, exactly, we have a more humble approach to our wireless. So whether it's putting a receiver on top of an amp or handing it to front of house on side stage and saying, hey, can you run an XLR into your Snake, for vocals or anything like that, or we have a pedal board mounted receiver. In some cases, people put rack mount receivers on boards, but that's not as common. I have seen it a few times recently even, but deciding where you put that kind of dictates the rest of your rig. So, even years ago, I would see folks putting, a wireless receiver on top of a tube amp head. Now, if you have a tuner or any other pedals, that means your guitar has to wirelessly talk to a receiver, then you run a cable from that to the front of the stage to your pedals, and then you run another one back to the amp. And if you run any time delay or time-sensitive effects that you control on a pedal board, you have to run 2 more cables, one for a send and one for a return. That's 4 cables just to run one rig. That is a lot of stuff. It's a tripping hazard. In my opinion, now with the new advantages of GLX-D and other wireless systems like it, you put the pedal board mounted receiver on your board. Okay, that's right there. That's 1 less cable. If you need to run a cable back to your amp, that's 2. And if you have any other time-based effects, okay, you get rid of 1. Or you put a rack mount receiver over your amp and you leave all of your things in a rack, and maybe use MIDI switching, or maybe you have a wireless pedal controller, which is starting to get more and more popular, changing effects via Bluetooth and MIDI. I don't use that much stuff when I play live. I sometimes forget to switch pickups if I even need to, so I'm not doing any of the tap dancing that a lot of other guitarists do, but picking where the receiver lives is going to dictate the rest of the rig. I'm a fan of keep it simple, so why not? Just move things accordingly. Maybe you won't trip on stuff nearly as much. Maybe your bandmates won't get as upset with you if your setup takes less than 5-10 minutes. I'm all about keep the changeovers short, keep things moving, put the receiver in the right spot, and then learn your rig back to front. And you do save a lot of time with, GLX-D 6 Plus specifically, because it has a tuner built into it. I'm just kind of going through the questions and prompts here, but why not use a wireless system that has a great tuner built into it as well? It's 1 less pedal that you have to worry about powering up. That's 1 less thing you have to worry about failing at a show. And you can set it up for needle or strobe tuning. It just kind of makes sense to me. I mean, I've been convinced.
I mean, fun side note about the tuner on that specific pedal, and correct me if I'm wrong or if you've heard anything different, but I believe when they were working on the design for the new version of GLX-D, GLX-D Plus, they actually created a bypass option, I think, on the pedal, so that you can, even if you're not, say you have it for when you're using it wireless, but you're at a gig and you're like, I'm not going to go wireless today, but I still want to use the tuner. You can just still use the tuner and not be using the wireless capabilities.
Yeah,
it's a very good tuner. So
yeah, it's a great tuner. It's very accurate. I just recently, I think I'm going to point the wrong way, but this Gibson Explorer over here.
I think it's the other. Oh, there it is. Yeah.
I used the GLX-D 6 Plus when intonating and setting up the guitar because it was that accurate. And I know there's Peterson strobes and there's Polytune and all of these other great, tuners out there in the market. But if it's one less thing I have to bring and it makes my setup easier, I'm just going to use the GLX D6 Plus for, setting up guitars, basses. It just works. It tracks quickly. You can play through a scale and it'll show you all the notes. I don't see the point of going back. Also, $400 on a tuner by itself, a little rich for my blood. I'm not going to do that. And you don't have to worry about extra cabling on your board. It's one less thing. Come on, people.
So the last bullet point here talks a little bit about battery life and charging. Can you go into sort of that side of things?
Yeah. Back even 8-9 years ago, rechargeable lithium batteries, were good. They're not as good as, or they weren't as good as they are today. But, as the charge depletes, sometimes, in an older analog system, some people would claim that, there'd be tone suck, the concept of your tone not being as bright. Obviously, almost every manufacturer out on the market was cool with using AA's. That's fine. Lithium ion, nickel metal hydride, some other composites. They work and they're fine, but it comes down to, how often are you charging them? How are you charging them? And do you leave them in a charger, for extended periods of time? So batteries would suffer from memory effect. The more you use them, the more you charge them that way. And that could be problematic, especially because rechargeable batteries aren't cheap. So yeah, obviously you want to go that route and not have to chuck alkaline AA's at every show, which adds up the loads at the end of the year. Also environmentally, not very nice. But with newer systems, whether it be GLXD Plus or SLXD or QLXD, ULXD, Axient, the options for rechargeability have gotten, so much better, and they're much more efficient. And whether they're at 100% or 20% charge, it's not going to affect how the transmitter operates, so your tone stays the same, signal transmission stays as clean as possible. It just makes sense, but, still take care of them. If you're not gigging for a few weeks, take the battery out of your transmitter, charge it up, most of the way, and then leave it in a climate-controlled space. You don't want to take your guitar transmitter and dock it for a month or even 2 months, if you're taking a break from touring or whatever, and then come back and, well, you run a risk of potentially having negatively affect the battery. So GLXD, also just that battery living in the transmitter, you can charge it with a USB cable on the way to a gig. We have a sled charger now, so if you don't have the access to the rest of your rig, you just plug it into the side of your computer in the sled and just charge your battery up and take a spare with you to practice. Or if you're using a tabletop or a rack mount receiver, there's a built-in dock. I took a call this morning from a customer who forgot that there is a docking charger on the front of the receiver, and I said, you don't need to buy anything else. Pop the battery in there. And they're like, wow, I could leave a spare battery in there for, when I'm gigging, and if I run into an issue, I can just pop it out of my body pack and grab another one. I was like, yes. That made their day. They just went and bought a spare battery for, I think it was $30-$40. Just happy. It's convenient. So even if you did leave the battery in that charger, I haven't seen an SB904, is that the new one? Yes, SB904. Even if you leave it in there for weeks, I haven't seen it degrade. So, or even months. I'm pretty sure there's still one in our office downtown that hasn't been yanked yet. So, be an interesting experiment to come back to next week. But yeah, they're efficient, built like tanks. They're not going to degrade over time. Why not?
Awesome.
Why not?
Why not? All right, let's talk about pedal boards. These are mysterious to me. Let's talk a little bit more about them.
Well, so I know plenty of people who build boards, and they build it a certain way, and they're happy. Maybe they're happy, but usually the biggest concerns that a lot of people have are, what are all of these pedals doing to my tone? Am I losing, signal strength along the way? Is it getting degraded from jump to jump? And plenty of people are content running one pedal into another, and then out towards their amp. And that's fine too. There's no wrong answer here, but there are more efficient and more effective ways to do this. And, at least with if you're using a GLXD system, it makes things nice and easy because that always lives at the beginning of your chain. So you know that that's there. Okay, great. We've got that. As long as you're using either our power supply adapter cable, or if you do want to use an isolated power supply, kind of like the Pedal Power Mondo shown in this mock-up pedal board that I made for the presentation, as long as the receiver is getting its requirements, current and voltage-wise, between 9 and 15 volts, at least 400 milliamp current for the new receiver, you're fine. And all pedals have different current requirements and stuff. Some might use as little as 10 milliamps. Some like a delay or advanced modeling effect stuff like a Line 6 DL4 or other cab simulation type pedals. Those are going to need a lot more. So using an isolated power supply is the way to go. It keeps things clean, it eliminates noise, and you're getting all of your pedals the appropriate amount of power, voltage, and current that they need. Now, some folks might use a daisy chain. Everybody's seen them. It's a little like one spot supply with a couple little pigtails along the way, and those are convenient if you're using 2 or 3 pedals. You want to keep your board really simple, that's fine, as long as the GLXD goes first, so that way it gets all the current it needs, and then you put a couple of pedals after it and keep it within its current supply. They'll work. Do I ever say that that's the way to go? No. I'm a nervous passenger when it comes to my guitar rig. My rig, I think we've shown it already, is super simple. It's a GLXD6, it's a Line 6 HX Stomp, and a Seymour Duncan power stage, and I run all the power on the bottom of the board. But even though it's completely in the digital realm, I'm still using an isolated power supply. I'm still using, handmade cables that I know won't fail, and everything runs. I just turn everything on, it's there. With daisy chaining, if you current starve one of the pedals, it just might not work. It might conk out mid-gig, and then you're like, oh, what's happened to my pedals? You start tapping around, nothing happens. All right, then you're back to a cable and you're running it straight into your amp, and nobody wants that to happen. But yeah, boards can be mysterious. I hope that's sort of demystified things a little bit. As long as you keep, good cabling, power is everything. Power. Sometimes you spend more on a power supply than you do on some of your pedals. I'm okay with that. I think more musicians should be okay with that, because then at least they'll work consistently. And another thing here, buffering. This is a question we get all the time. Do I need a buffer? Do I need it? Do I need it? Do I need it? Is the GLXD6 buffered? Is it true bypass? Everybody calm down. Any wireless system effectively acts as a buffer because you're getting a nice, clean, hot output from your receiver. Great. Now that we've answered that, as far as it being true bypass, well, if you lose power to the pedal, you'll still get something out of it, but is it fully bypassed? No. Not every pedal needs to be true bypass anyways. Excuse me. Is it nice? I don't know. I'm not the biggest tone nerd to begin with anyways. I like my guitar to sound good. I like my bass rig to sound good. But I'm not going to get caught up on spending $400 on a buffer. I just don't think it's necessary. Unless you're running a super long cable run from your pedal board back to your amps, okay, yeah, I could see that making sense, a little output buffer to make up for signal loss along the way, but is it absolutely necessary? No, not at all.
All right, I'll take the buffer out of my Amazon shopping cart or Sweetwater shopping cart or Guitar Center shopping cart or insert preferred dealer name here shopping cart.
Right. Mm-hmm.
All right, let's talk about some issues, some common troubleshooting, because I know this is what you deal with all day, every day.
All day, every day. Which, by the way, if you do run into problems with your Shure products, you can call us at 800-516-2525. Extension 2. If you're talking about guitar gear, extension 2. Usually, the big issues are, power. Like I was just saying, power is everything. My GLXD6 kind of sputters, or it sounds like something's passing through the system. Well, it's probably current starved. Are you using our power supply? or a compatible isolated power supply. And then we can start digging into, okay, what brand, what output on the power supply are you using, or is it the cable between the supply and the pedal? A couple of things to check. If your signal's too quiet or distorted, well, then we look at gain. The pack itself, you really can't do anything with. There's a link button, a charge port, or a USB-C port, and then the battery door. So, well, I can't adjust the gain on this thing, so it must be the receiver. And depending on what kind of pickups are in your guitar, or what kind of preamp might be in your bass, which we get a lot of calls about. My bass, it just sounds so distorted through your GLXD wireless system. What's wrong? It's got to be the wireless. Well, hold on. And then we ask them what kind of bass they're playing, and it's usually basses because, active preamps do sound really nice on basses, and they're usually smoking hot. Loads of output, just an open fire hose of output, and we're like, turn down the gain on the wireless system, and you might not run into this problem. So that's a good thing. Or if you're, running a super low output, like a vintage single coil pickup, yeah, you might need a little more gas in the tank, so you can increase the gain to get the signal, nice and healthy to the receiver and out into your pedal rig. Those two come up as often, I think, together, though, as the third and fourth issues here. The sound is dropping out, and I'm getting RF dropouts. Okay, so the third one is kind of a symptom of the fourth, but it can also be isolated incidents. Usually, if the receiver will tell you if there's RF issues, you'll see the blue light that should be solid. That means you've got a stable connection. Will likely start blinking, and it will blink a lot. That would likely mean there's probably a Wi-Fi router, or a Wi-Fi enabled mixer with a router, or a lighting controller, or even some of those like Neo camera systems that have Wi-Fi switching. If that's happening, move your pedal board further away from those things. Or if you don't need a Wi-Fi router for your mixer on stage, which I know a lot of people do for in-ears, turn it off if you're not making changes during the gig. Keeping the receiver at least 15 feet from those devices helps out immensely. And making sure you're in the right group and channel. So if you have 2.4, Wi-Fi enabled gear on stage, you can set the receiver to 5.8 gig. And that's indicated by a letter and a number. So if you see two numbers, 2-digit number on your pedal receiver, that means it's in 2.4 mode. If you see a number and a letter, that's 5.8. So choose the right band accordingly. If you end up going into a gig where everybody's using Wi-Fi and they refuse to turn it off, which can happen, well, at least now with the GLXD 6 Plus, you can just plug a cable right into it and use it, like we said, wired, rather than having to build like a little passive ABY box where you could go in wired on one side and switch to that input and then feed your next pedals or what have you, or go wireless from the original pedal receiver into the other side. That's the most common ones for GLXD, usually. And then if it's other systems, like BLX rack mount or SLXD, QLXD, ULXD, usually scanning for a clean frequency. We start there. We're still getting issues. Address the cabling. If you have a spare, which everybody should, always bring spares. Swap those out. That's an amazing troubleshooting technique that a lot of people forget about, and they don't bring spare cables, which drives me nuts. Drives everybody nuts. And then lastly, check the power. Make sure that the power supply that you're using is still in good shape. If you're plugging it into a wall outlet and you get a weird ground issue, you just hear a hum or a hiss or static in your rig, probably best to find a power conditioner or try another outlet or have backup power supply just in case. Those are usually the most common issues. We get a lot of weird ones these days, though. Plenty of mysteries day to day.
Something I'll say about, RF stability, and if you're getting a lot of dropouts and you keep scanning and you're getting clean channels from the scans and you just don't know what's happening, sometimes it's very simple and it's just line of sight. Just remember that transmitter antenna and that receiver antenna have to have a direct, clear line of sight, and not a lot of metal in between them, not a lot of, they've got to see everything. So at the end of the day, if nothing else is working, just make sure that they're they're in view of each other. It's a very simple solution, but you'd be surprised how many times it gets overlooked.
Yeah, I just last week had a caller that will remain nameless call in, and they had a very elaborate stage backdrop and scrims in front of their amps to mask the cabinets. And they had a GLX D6 Plus on a rack shelf right next to their modeling rig. It's a rack-mounted modeling rig. And when they pushed the shelf in, after they tuned up their guitar and were ready for the show, where'd it go? Like, what happened to my signal? They pulled the drawer out, everything works. So they, one, behind a scrim that did indeed have a metal frame, two, was in a metal box almost entirely, and three, just no line of sight. So yeah, you've got to make sure you have line of sight. The number of times we take that call or get that email from people, you should feel surprised, but you wouldn't. But also, in spite of our customers' best unintentional efforts to scuttle a wireless system, sometimes they'll still work. And I'm sorry we made such a stable wireless system that just happens to work through a drywall section on the side of your stage. I'm sorry. But as an engineer at the company who deals with this stuff all the time, and my cohorts and you, none of us would ever say, set it up that way. We would never tell you that that's the preferred method. Don't do that. Please.
Best practices are best practices for a reason. And, I say this all the time, in my band, it's like, yeah, it might work. It might work 9 times out of 10 doing it the improper way, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Right.
But it's that 10th time. It's that one time where it's worked every other time and you're in a new venue and that one workaround that you had is going to fail. So, set yourself up for success. I think you have to, just because it works most of the time doesn't mean it's going to work all the time. So make sure you're doing what needs to be done, because you don't want to have a failure. You don't want to have to be scurrying before a gig. So
no. And I think the best summation of all that is it'll work until it doesn't. And that's a favorite saying of a dear friend and colleague, Chris Sudi. I think he and I probably drop that once a day, once a week, probably more. But it's true.
It's very true. It's very true. All righty. So I think that's time for questions then, and we've got a few here. So this first question here, have y'all had any issues with the pedal board version shown here? That's, I think, the GLX D6 Plus, and power cables interfering with the signal. Mine has. Move the power cable seems to help, but wasn't sure if y'all had more advice, please. So I know you kind of talked about this a little bit, Pete, but maybe go into that a little bit more.
So that's a good one though, and that I think depends on if you're using the supplied power supply cable. So did this person say what they were using, or are we just kind of going both sides, isolated power supply and supplied power supply?
Yeah, I don't have any specific info, so let's maybe just kind of.
Yeah, so to the folks that run into this issue, if you're using the supplied power supply, more than likely transformer issue. If you move it further away from the pedal receiver and it gets quieter, or the signal gets less choppy or distorted, probably just need to swap the power supply cable out entirely. If you're using an isolated power supply, what I would do is make sure, inspect the cable, make sure both barrels on both ends look to be free of any obstructions, no occlusions in the barrel, and then test it with the receiver plugged in, and then wiggle either end of the barrel connectors on the cable. And if you start to hear the noise, could be the strain relief starting to fail, and you probably just want to swap that out. And if you are, if you do enjoy soldering and you've got a soldering iron and you're deft hand with it, just snip the end and rebuild the cable, remake the cable. If that doesn't do it and you're using an isolated power supply, the first thing I always look at is move it to a different output. And if the noise persists, then try another cable. And if it still persists, use the supplied power supply. And if the noise still persists, then it might be an issue with the pedal itself, and that should come in for service. through our website, shure.com/service.
And this person did follow up and say it was an isolated power supply, but not the Shure one. It's a D'Addario power supply. So
okay, so that I haven't,
and it's
used
under the
those
board.
nearly
Yeah,
as much. Yeah, okay. I haven't used their power supplies nearly as much, though. I would assume that they're built well. D'Addario does make a lot of great stuff. So I would try, cabling, different outputs on the supply, and then try the same cable, same output from the supply to different pedals and see if it does the same thing. And then you can kind of find the source of the problem from there.
All right. Speaking, another question here about the GLXD Plus. Will the older GLXD cables fit the new Plus version? This person bought the 90-degree cable and doesn't want to have to buy it again, which is totally understandable.
Yeah, the threaded connector on the top of the pack, unless for whatever reason on a given day the die that cuts them was maybe a little off or a little different. No, it's the same connector. You should be able to use the threaded locking connector on both the original GLXD1 pack and the GLXD1 Plus, the new version.
Great. Okay, here's a good question. Do we have any tips for miking acoustic guitars? This person has a project coming up that will be requiring hiding microphones and transmitters in the acoustic.
Ooh, now this is a good one. This is a really good one. Wirelessly, you have a lot of options. You could, there's the old gaff tape the transmitter to the back of the acoustic, off to the side where you can still see the receiver, and then run a cable, preferably a right angle cable into the output jack. If you have a preamp or a pickup in your acoustic, that would be my first attempt. If you're using a sound hole like a baffle to help prevent feedback, that option plus the wireless transmitter and a preamp works quite well. If you want the resonant sound of the acoustic to be picked up with a microphone, I would say, if you're trying to keep things really small, really, easily masked, our Duraplex and Twinplex line of mics, the color options, depending on the finish of your guitar, you have a number of different choices there. Getting, a nice omnidirectional, natural sounding lavalier mic, either mount it in the sound hole somehow, and you can run that up the top side of the fretboard and get it to the sound hole, and it's very minimal. And then wear a transmitter on your belt or on your strap, okay? If you don't have a preamp. And if you didn't want to go that route, you could also bridge mount the lavalier, but that'll result in a much brighter sound, a lot more percussive. Like, it'll sound almost like a piezo pickup because you're, right where the strings make contact with the body. But those would be my two guesses.
Yeah, and this person followed up and said they're not using pickups and they need to not be seen by camera, and they have Axions and lots of Twinplex. So I think they've got what they need to. It's about figuring out the mounting, and I would say to this person, call our support team, and you can talk to someone like Pete or Pete himself, and get some great information. So I think you're set up for the success. You just need to figure out the best mounting to hide what you need to hide, but it is totally doable and totally possible.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. All right, let's see. So if this is a question about line of sight. So if the pedal board is in front by the mic stand and the GLXD6 is on it, and you have the pack on the back connected to a strap, this technically isn't line of sight. Suggestions then? Should I put the pedal board on the side or the front? What would you say about that?
So, the reason why we talk about packs being behind people, even if it's just like, presentation use, vocal use, what have you, the human body being made of salt water, that's a really, really, really effective absorber of RF energy. So, yeah, you're going to lose some of that, radiated power off the antenna because it's next to you. But if you put it on a strap and it's close enough to your guitar, you don't just get direct transmission from the transmit antenna. You also get reflected off of the floor, off of wall, ceiling, what have you. So, I run around like a maniac on stage if it's large enough, and I have the transmitter effectively at like within 6 inches, maybe even less, of the guitar when I plug in for a gig. So that way the transmit antenna is as exposed as possible. So depending on, like how high or how low you play your guitar, that will change that. But, and what the shape of the guitar is, and all that. But if you put the transmitter towards the guitar, closer to the guitar, that usually helps quite a lot. And, yeah, you might have excess cable length. What I end up doing is I do, over a couple of turns, and then I use a small, post office rubber band to keep the excess cable on the strap. And then I put the transmitter on, and then I'll use like a wristband or something to keep everything nice and tight. And, cloth isn't a problem, and the antenna will be closer to the pedal if that's something that you're worried about. But yeah, you'll still get reflected RF, off of the floor, off of other, physical obstructions, things like that. And, it'll still work.
And I think, I think the difference of line of sight being on your body and, you're generally going to be close to the pedal board. That's a whole different story. I mean, as opposed to, we're talking about more like a situation where somebody's putting it in a metal box or putting it down off the stage or behind a bunch of things. So, even though technically it's behind you, it's not direct line of sight. I guess maybe that's a little bit of a misnomer, but you're definitely going to be close enough at that point that it's not going to be an issue. Yeah.
And, for what it's worth, I have personally walked into a group of people at a show recently when I was on tour with the transmitter on my strap, and I turned to face the stage, complete blockage. Didn't get a dropout. Again, in spite of my best unintentional efforts to scuttle the system, it still worked. So that's cool. Would I recommend doing that all the time? No, but it sure was fun.
So I have a related question to that there, Pete.
Absolutely.
This person walks around the audience during shows, and it hasn't cut out yet, so that's good. And here's a fun question we always love to hear. But what is the maximum distance I can be away from my rig and still be confident the wireless will work? Oh, the old range question.
The old range question. I'll put this in big, bold, light up font, somehow, imaginarily speaking.
I don't have that producerial capability, so just imagine it in your head.
I should have just held up a piece of paper that said, that depends. Now, yes, tested in ideal conditions, meaning no Wi-Fi devices, no other sources of 2.4 or 5.8 traffic anywhere near a system, we've been able to test GLXD effectively at around 100 feet. Now, that doesn't mean you can't get further away if you have reflection from ceiling, wall, floor, what have you. That doesn't mean it might be slightly less. It could literally just be the way that goes in that moment. But around 100 feet is in ideal conditions. Now, if you walk into a sea of people in a venue with Wi-Fi, we immediately don't call that ideal conditions. But, again, we've seen the system do some pretty remarkable things. There's a pretty prominent YouTuber, gentleman named Henning, I think he's from Germany, runs a really cool studio-based, gear review and musically inclined YouTube channel. And he got on like one of those hoverboard, like single wheel things, and they put a receiver next to an amp outside of his studio, and he got like 250 feet away before it started to really choke out and drop. And I was like, what? That's impossible. But then I'm like, wait a minute. You got a lot of houses, a lot of other reflected stuff. Okay, maybe you could go that far. Maybe. Am I going to say that's normal? No. Is it possible? Yes. Should you expect that? No. I could keep going. But I would say in typical gigging conditions, I've gotten well over 50 feet away from my pedal board often and have had great results with the GLXD stuff. Now, if you're using SLXD or QLXD, Axient Digital, those systems being UHF, yeah, the tested range is usually around 300 feet with line of sight because the wavelength of that range is, about 3 feet. It's much longer. 2.4 and 5.8 itty bitty. It's like a couple of inches at best. So physically, yeah, UHF system, if you're worried about going from one end of a football field to another while playing the national anthem for a Bears game, you wouldn't want to use GLXD. you'd probably want to use Axion Digital or ULXD. But if you want to get 40, 50, 60 feet away from a pedal or from a tabletop receiver pretty consistently, yeah, GLXD is just fine.
Yeah, and I would think that would be a good suggestion to that person is, if you're needing to go further, just reach out to us. We can help you figure out, what system and what setup is going to get you what you need. But it sounds like it's working so far. So keep it with 100 feet. You might be able to stretch, but just that's kind of what we suggest in ideal conditions. So, yeah, the range question is always an it depends. There's so many factors that we can't control, and every place is different. You go into a new venue and you had your in-ear system set up perfectly, and the new venue it sounds completely different. And my bandmates are like, "It was perfect the last show," and I'm like, "Yeah, we're in a different space. It's completely different."
Completely different every time.
Okay. Let's see. Next question, or this is about, so do all of the Shure receivers across our wireless lines, do all of them have a 1/4 inch outputs except for ULXD 4D, 4Q, and ADX 5D?
All receivers, ULXD 4Q, if I remember, that has 1/4 inch out.
Okay.
They can be used simultaneously. ULXD and Axion dual and quad receivers also have Dante outs out of RJ45 connectors. ADX 5D is the exception. That depends on the back plate and depends on how you have it rigged up. Is it in a bag? Are you slotting it into a type interface type mixer?
Yeah.
That will change. ADX 5D is
its own animal. Yeah.
Its own. Yeah. But all of our receivers, unless otherwise noted, specified, or modified in some way by a customer, XLR and 1/4 inch outs, and can be used simultaneously.
Awesome. All right. Here's a fun fact. Make sure the antenna on the pack is above a tin can. Yeah, look up tobacco can ZZ Top would use. I was in a ZZ Top tribute, so... Good. That's
a good one to have.
Good fun fact. All right.
Looks cool, but will drop your wireless.
All right. And with that, I think we've gotten through all of the questions. If we somehow missed your question, or there's another question that just pops up in your head, or you have a question about anything else, Shure audio product related, as Pete said, you can call our support team. We have a fabulous group of guys and gals there that are just so knowledgeable and so helpful. It's really a gold mine of information. So I believe that, what was that number again, Pete?
It's 800-516-2525. If you have issues with network product or our STEM product line, call, hit extension 1. If it's anything else, extension 2.
And then I'll also say, if you're not a phone call person, I hate talking on the phone. You can also open up a ticket with them by going to shure.com/contact. And that'll get you in the queue. And you can get some support via email. All right. Thank you so much, Pete. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you, Cheryl. This was a lot of fun indeed.
And thanks to everybody for attending. I hope you got a little something out of this. I know I sure did. I'm not going to be picking up the guitar anytime soon, but I know if I did, I would have good information to start with. All right, everybody. Have a great day. We hope to see you on the next one.
See you soon.
Bye.